The sound came suddenly, sharp, final, impossible to take back. And just like that, a voice that once defined an entire generation went silent forever. Kurt Cobain was only 27 years old, a kid from a small, gray town in Washington who somehow climbed all the way to the top of the world, only to find nothing waiting for him there. He had everything people spend their whole lives chasing: fame, money, influence, a band that changed music forever, a face that defined what it meant to be cool. And yet, behind all of it, there was a different story unfolding, one filled with contradiction. Because Kurt Cobain wasn't just a rock star, he was a paradox. He wanted success, but resented it. He craved attention, but feared being seen. He built a global legacy, while quietly falling apart. So the question that still lingers, decades later, is painfully simple. How does someone who gets everything still lose themselves? This isn't just the story of Nirvana. It's the story of a mind at war with itself, a life that burned too bright, and a legacy that somehow became bigger than the man who created it. Kurt Cobain. The rain never really stopped in Aberdeen. It wasn't the kind of place people dreamed about. Gray skies, empty streets, and a quiet heaviness that seemed to settle into everything. For most people, it was just a small logging town. For Kurt Cobain, it was the beginning of everything, and the source of something he would never fully escape. But it didn't start in darkness. As a child, Kurt was bright, sensitive, almost gentle in a way that stood out. He smiled easily. He drew constantly. By the time he was 5, his talent was already obvious. He could sketch characters from memory, filling walls and notebooks with images that felt alive. There was imagination in him, energy, a kind of inner world that felt bigger than the place he was growing up in. And then, it broke. When Kurt was 9 years old, his parents got divorced. It's easy to describe it as just another family separation, but for Kurt, it wasn't just a change. It was a fracture, the kind that doesn't heal cleanly, the kind that quietly reshapes how you see yourself. He didn't understand it, so he blamed himself. That feeling of being unwanted, of being left behind, stayed with him. It didn't fade, it settled in. After the divorce, Kurt's life became unstable, moving between homes, living with his mom, then his dad, then others. Nothing ever felt permanent. Nothing ever felt like home. And when you don't feel like you belong anywhere, you start to turn inward. School didn't help. Kurt didn't fit the mold. He wasn't athletic. He wasn't interested in playing the roles that other boys around him seemed to fall into naturally. He was smaller, quieter, more emotional. And that made him a target. He spent more time on the outside looking in. By his early teens, that quiet sensitivity had started to twist into something heavier: anger, confusion, isolation. He began experimenting with drugs, skipping school, drifting further away from anything that felt stable. But even then, there was one place he could still go: music. It didn't judge him. It didn't reject him. It didn't ask him to be anything other than what he already was. And slowly, without anyone really noticing at first, it became more than just an escape. It became the only thing that made sense. Long before the fame, before Nirvana, before the world ever heard his voice, Kurt Cobain was just a kid trying to survive a feeling he didn't have the words for. The first time he saw it, something clicked. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even technically impressive, but it was real. People were screaming, falling into each other, laughing, losing control. There were no rules, no expectations, no need to be anything other than exactly what you were in that moment. For Kurt, that changed everything. Because up until then, music felt like something distant, something reserved for people who were better, more skilled, more put together. But punk stripped all of that away, it said. You don't have to be perfect to be heard. And for someone who had spent most of his life feeling like he didn't belong, that idea was freedom. So he picked up a guitar. At first, he wasn't great, but that didn't matter. What he lacked in technique, he made up for in feeling. He played with intensity, with emotion, with something raw that couldn't be taught. And more importantly, he believed in it. Kurt wasn't just playing music, he was building a world where he finally made sense. By the time he dropped out of high school, that world had become his entire focus. He worked random jobs he didn't care about, slept wherever he could, drifted through days that felt uncertain and unstable. But no matter how chaotic things got, he kept coming back to the same thing: writing, drawing, playing, filling notebooks with ideas, lyrics, thoughts about life, about society, about what music should be. Even then, he wasn't just reacting to the world, he was trying to shape it. And eventually, he found someone who understood that energy: Krist Novoselic. They met through the local music scene, bonded over punk, and started experimenting together. The early days were messy. Different band names, different sounds, nothing fully locked in. But there was something there, something building. When they finally settled on the name Nirvana, it almost felt ironic, because the music they were creating wasn't peaceful, it wasn't calm, it was loud, distorted, emotional, sometimes chaotic. But maybe that was the point. Maybe Nirvana wasn't about peace. Maybe it was about release. As they started playing small shows around the Northwest, people began to notice. Not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. On stage, Kurt transformed. Off stage, he was quiet, reserved, almost withdrawn. But the moment he stepped into the noise, it was like something took over. He screamed, he moved, he poured everything out. And for the first time in his life, people weren't looking past him, they were listening. In a world that had always made him feel invisible, Kurt Cobain had finally found a way to be seen. At first, it didn't look like a revolution, just another album, another release, another band trying to break through. But within months, everything changed. When Nevermind came out in 1991, it didn't just succeed, it exploded. What started as a modest release quickly turned into something no one, not even Kurt, fully expected. Smells Like Teen Spirit began playing on MTV, and suddenly, Nirvana was everywhere. The sound was different. It had the aggression of punk, but the hooks of pop. It was loud, but strangely accessible, raw, but unforgettable. And people connected to it instantly. Teenagers saw themselves in it. Outsiders heard something familiar. Even people who didn't understand it couldn't ignore it. Within a few months, Nevermind climbed the charts and knocked Michael Jackson off the #1 spot. Just like that, the underground had taken over the mainstream. And at the center of it all was Kurt Cobain. He became something bigger than a musician. He became a symbol. The flannel shirts, the messy hair, the careless attitude, the sense that nothing really mattered, while everything clearly did. He defined what cool looked like in the 90s, and the world followed. But behind the image, something else was happening. Because the success that Kurt had always chased didn't feel the way he thought it would. He wanted to be heard. He wanted his music to matter, but he didn't want to be owned. And fame doesn't give you that choice. Suddenly, every move was watched. Every word was analyzed. Every interview, every performance, every decision became part of a narrative he couldn't control anymore. There was pressure to tour, pressure to perform, pressure to live up to something that was growing faster than he could process. And the more visible he became, the less in control he felt. That contradiction started to wear on him. Because Kurt had always cared deeply, even if he pretended not to. He downplayed his success in interviews, acted like it didn't matter, like Nirvana was just another band. But behind that attitude, he was paying attention, watching MTV, noticing when their videos weren't played, measuring his place in a system he claimed to reject. It was a balancing act that couldn't last. He wanted authenticity in a world that rewarded image. He wanted privacy in a life that was now completely public. He wanted success without the weight that came with it. And slowly, almost quietly, the dream started to turn. What once felt like freedom began to feel like a trap. The bigger Nirvana became, the smaller Kurt started to feel inside it. Love has a way of feeling like salvation until it doesn't. When Kurt met Courtney Love, it wasn't quiet, it wasn't gradual, it was immediate, intense, almost inevitable. She was everything he wasn't, or maybe everything he wished he could be. Loud, fearless, unapologetically herself. And for someone like Kurt, someone who constantly filtered himself, who cared deeply about how he was perceived, that kind of energy was magnetic. With Courtney, he didn't have to pretend as much. He felt understood, at least for a while. They moved fast, fell hard, and in early 1992, they got married on a beach in Hawaii, far from everything. For a moment, it looked like Kurt had found something he had been missing his entire life: a partner, a family, a sense of home. And when their daughter, Frances Bean, was born, it felt like a new beginning. He adored her. People close to him said he would light up around her in ways they hadn't seen before. There was love there, real love. But even that wasn't enough, because while his personal life was evolving, his internal world was collapsing. Heroin had already entered the picture. At first, it was escape, a way to dull the pain, to quiet the constant noise in his head, to ease the physical discomfort he'd been dealing with for years. But over time, it stopped being a choice. It became a need. And the more successful he became, the easier it was to disappear into it. Money removed barriers. Fame created isolation. And isolation made everything worse. Then the outside world pushed in. A single article, one story published to millions. Suddenly, their private life was public property. Accusations, headlines, rumors. Not just about Kurt and Courtney, but about their child. Their daughter was taken from them temporarily, investigated, questioned, turned into a symbol in a narrative they didn't control. For Kurt, it was more than humiliation. It was betrayal. It confirmed something he had already started to believe, that the world wasn't just watching him, it was against him. After that, something shifted. He became more guarded, more distant, more suspicious of the people around him. Even the band began to fracture. Chris and Dave were still there, but the connection wasn't the same. There was tension, distance, silence where there used to be energy, and musically. Kurt responded the only way he knew how, with In Utero. The album was harsher, colder, less polished. It stripped away the accessibility of Nevermind and replaced it with something raw and uncomfortable. It wasn't trying to please anyone, it was honest. And in that honesty, you could hear it. The exhaustion, the anger, the detachment, the sense that something inside him was fading. By 1993, heroin wasn't occasional anymore. It was constant. There were overdoses, near-death moments, attempts at recovery that never lasted. People around him tried to help. Interventions, rehab, support. But nothing seemed to reach him in a lasting way, because the problem wasn't just the drug, it was the mind behind it. Kurt wasn't just trying to escape reality, he was trying to escape himself. And slowly, piece by piece, he was losing that fight. By early 1994, it was all starting to fall apart. From the outside, Nirvana was still one of the biggest bands in the world, but inside, things were breaking. The tour in Europe felt off. Kurt was distant, exhausted, unstable. Some nights, the performances were powerful. Other nights, it felt like he wasn't fully there at all. Then came Rome, a hotel room, a quiet night, and a moment that nearly ended everything. He was found unresponsive. It was called an overdose. Whether it was intentional or not, it didn't really matter anymore, because something had clearly shifted. After that, the decline was fast. There were attempts to help him. Friends, family, bandmates, all trying to pull him back. An intervention, rehab, another chance. For a moment, it looked like maybe things could turn around, but then he left quietly, without telling anyone. And in those final days, Kurt Cobain disappeared from the world. Long before the world realized it, he was seen walking alone, wandering, isolated. Not the voice of a generation, not a global icon, just a man lost inside his own thoughts. And on April 5th, 1994, the story ended. He was 27 years old. It's easy to look at that moment and define everything by it, to reduce his life to how it ended. But that would miss the point. Because Kurt Cobain wasn't just a tragedy, he was something far more complicated. He was a contradiction. A person who cared deeply, but acted like nothing mattered. Someone who wanted connection, but pushed people away. Someone who built one of the most influential bands in history, while quietly struggling to exist within it. And maybe that's why he still matters. Because he reflects something real, something uncomfortable, but honest. The idea that success doesn't fix everything, that pain doesn't disappear just because your dreams come true, that the human mind doesn't always follow logic. And yet, despite everything, his music survived. More than that, it continues to reach people, across generations, across time. People who feel lost, people who feel misunderstood, people who are searching for something they can't quite explain. They still find him. Not because he had all the answers, but because he didn't. And somehow, that made them feel less alone. So maybe the legacy of Kurt Cobain isn't just the songs. Maybe it's the permission he gave people to feel, to be imperfect, to struggle, and still create something meaningful. If there's one thing to take from his story, it might be this: you don't have to have everything figured out to matter. And if you're still here, still searching, then your story isn't over yet.